Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a cool review for you from a brand new independent micro brand out of Singapore called MMI Watch Company. And this is essentially their first offering, as far as I know of anyway. Of course, this is a dive watch. Now, some key common characteristics in design language when you're looking for a dive watch, you're going to want water resistance, normally some type of screw down crown. You want something that's tough, legible with a dive bezel, and a diver's extension is always great if on bracelet. Now, kind of what MMI is really trying to do here is build a traditional watch with non-traditional designs. And just by looking at this watch, of course there is a particular formula for dive watches, but this isn't necessarily your typical dive watch. I think they've definitely tried to offer you something quite different here. And you know what, is that bezel, does it need to go one more click? That's gonna bother me. Oh, maybe not. Maybe it's just a little bit of a little room there in the play. Not too shabby. Actually, before you write this off as having loose bezel action, it actually has really great bezel action. I'd say that's probably one of the shining parts of this watch is the bezel finish and the construction as well as the action. Anyways, guys, this is known as the Dumbo 500. Essentially, it's a square case, lugless design, and it has a couple things going for it. It has some things that are a little odd, and I think a little bit different, just maybe even just for the sake of being different. But this isn't the final iteration. This is actually just a prototype. So let's go ahead and jump in. We can talk about some of the differences and more. Okay, now as you can see, it does have this very unique square shaped case, which is about 46 by 46. It doesn't really have any lugs because they're actually hidden even from the underneath there, as you can see, which is something you actually really don't like about this watch. I feel like this lug design of kind of hiding them doesn't really offer much in the way I feel like it doesn't really do the watch any favors, although it looks really cool when you do take the bracelet out and it's just this block there. That's really cool looking, but it's a very, very limiting factor when it comes to changing out the bracelet and whatnot. Me personally, I would have preferred that they just had either done integrated lugs, which is crazy, right? Most people would never want integrated lugs, but I think if they really wanted to keep that silhouette and that design language, I would have honestly preferred integrated lugs, and I definitely would have preferred a tapering bracelet. I feel like the non-taper there, although with the bulkiness of the case, I can see why they would have done that, but as far as wearability goes, that taper is just really going to help and be a point of refinement. And then also, of course, it really forces you, when there's no taper, to use a clasp that is also quite thin, essentially, because you don't want to go too much bigger than the 24 millimeters there when it comes to that lug width. Now, this model is actually offered with two different movements. You could do the Swiss SW200, and on bracelet and everything, you're going to be looking at about 827, or you can do the NH35, which is seen here in this model, and that's only 551. Now, it is, obviously that's a bit pricey, but it does, it has the goods. Everything's fully loomed. You have ceramic. You have a really nice case finishing there. Look at the beveled edges around this case. It's really, really outstanding. The loom is applied extremely well. This bezel here is a real highlight for me. Look at the coin edge on there. Really beautiful, and let's hear the action. Really, really nice. And is there a little bit of back play? I guess you could say that there is. It's more to kind of get in that lock position. There's that little rock there, but it's of course, then it goes a little bit too far. But this action is really nicely dialed in. I gotta say, that's for me a real highlight. And then the tactile feeling of the finishing on this coin edge is really, really outstanding. So there's probably a lot of mainstream brands that actually could learn from this. I mean, look at that bezel there. That coining is absolutely outstanding. So a little bit more here, you do see that it's a dome sapphire. It's only a single dome, so when you do get at angle here, you're going to notice, because it's not domed underneath the crystal and just domed on top, there is going to be quite a bit of distortion there. But I mean, at that harsh of an angle, are you really going to be trying to read the time anyway? You can see even at these angles here, it's still quite readable. It's just when you get to the extremes, because of it is just a slight dome. If it was more domed, then you get more distortion, so it's a bit of a balance there. So nicely done from that perspective. Now, the bezel I did mention, 120 clicks, unidirectional, ceramic insert, fully loomed. The crown is screwed down and nicely tucked into the case corner there, so it doesn't actually need any type of crown guards because of the natural kind of shape of the case, which I think is a pretty smart design. Now, the movement inside, this particular one is a Seiko Instruments NH35, which is essentially just a 4R35, but it's, you know, the version that Seiko sells to other brands to use. Perfectly suitable for a sports watch, and very reliable and whatnot, and it'll probably save you money on servicing because you could just buy a new movement instead of worrying about getting this thing fine-tuned if you know, need be ever comes. But if you really love this design and are willing to pay top dollar for kind of the more high-end version with the Sellita SW200, you're more than welcome to do that at you know, kind of a really nice markup there. Now, as far as the dial goes, it is fully brushed. As you can see, we do have the applied indices. The hands are polished. There you go, let the reflection pick up. And then you do have that painted seconds hand. Really nice from that perspective. I really am enjoying the color play here, the balance. I think they did a really great job of kind of getting this concept and making it an attractive looking watch. But for me, you know, there's just a couple little things, and then of course some things that actually they've already noticed that they will be changing, like the end links here are going to be quite different. They're going to be shorter and have actually some chamfering to offer them just a little bit of more mobility there while they're stuck into the case. Right now, that you can see they jot out quite a bit, so that it's going to really extend that case. Although you do have a really short lug to lug, what this male end here on what it does is it basically extends that case out, which is not what you want, especially in a watch that's big, that's trying to wear small. So that is going to be something that is going to be I guess revised. And then as far as water resistance goes, this thing is a real tank, and the nice thing is it actually has some outstanding depth rating at 500 meters, which is really good because you see some watches out there that are just super thick, and you know, for no reason. This one, it does have about a 16 millimeter thickness if you count the crystal there. Without the crystal, it's about 14.6. So you know, it has a lot of thickness, but it does go hand in hand with the depth rating there. And then you do have that automatic helium release valve, which is really nice. The lugs are a 24 millimeters, so quite wide, and because of the hood on both sides, you know, sometimes you'll see hooded lugs from the top. These are actually, you know, basically hooded from the top and bottom, so they're a concealed lug, and they actually have like a proprietary little pin there, you can see, for you to be able to remove and put on the bracelet. So that's, again, quite a limiting factor there. You know, I think if you're going to do that, you might as well get a little bit less of a compromise, honestly, and just do integrated lugs if it's going to be kind of that difficult. And really that's proprietary when it comes to what kind of bracelet or strap options you're going to be putting into this watch head. Now the band is, you know, 24 millimeters all the way down. It's non-tapering. It has a milled clasp, double locking, folding. The folding arm here though is milled, which is nice. Again, I'm sure the thinness of the material in this clasp probably had a lot to do with the fact that it was still 24 millimeters, and essentially you didn't want to make it a 26 millimeter thick clasp or anything like that. That would have been rough. Of course, this is just a review prototype, so I actually didn't even change the pins out. One is because this thing is so wide. My tool for changing the pins actually isn't wide enough to fit links this wide into there, so I just didn't want to mess with it, and it's probably for the best. But with that said, let's actually, what I'll do is I'll just drape it onto the wrist, and you guys can get an idea of how this thing wears and lays. All right, now as you can see on my 7¼ inch wrist, it actually does work quite well. Bigger, I mean, I should say smaller than you would think for something that has a 46 millimeter width on it, because of basically a very short height. You can see though that the design here, I'll just pull this tight. You can see that it does extend the case quite a bit and give you a little bit of space there as far as the way it's going to lay. So it's not going to ride super, you know, it's not going to ride wrapped around the wrist. It's more going to sit on top of the wrist there. You know, and then of course if this was fitted a bit tighter, you know, with the lack of taper there, it's definitely gonna you know, hurt mobility. But that's one of the reasons why it does do that for me anyways, because I do wear my watches a little bit looser and a little bit lower on the wrist versus more traditional, which would be above that wrist bone. And if that's the case and you want to wear your watch really tight and you know, held up here, then it's not really going to mess with any type of mobility, but you are going to have to really have that watch cinched down because of the weight of the watch and the way that the watch sits, for it to basically hold in place on your wrist. So, you know, I think they obviously up close on a wristy, it's gonna look way oversized. You know, it's gonna looks like something you could use to morph into you know, a Power Ranger by the size of it up close. But then you take a look from further away, and I think it gives you definitely more of a tool vibe. Still quite bold, very handsome. I think the color play is really on point there, and the execution. I do feel like the case is a bit let down by that bracelet. I think the case is a real standout, and as far as the case goes, that bezel, and then of course that continuous beveled edge that just goes all the way around the square case, really the highlight of the design here. So let's actually get this off wrist and show you guys some low light transition and some lume shots, because this thing has got a ton of lume. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights. So as you can see, that BGW9 is just blasting away. Really nice, outstanding lume there, guys. So this thing's gonna be very legible. So from a tool perspective, this is exactly what you're looking for when you're gonna want something for water sports. You know, you're not gonna forget it on the wrist. Great presence, great legibility, you know, especially in the dark, definitely in the light too, with the really interesting color palette choices that we've had. But one of the things I also like to do is low light transition there, so you can actually get an idea of what some of these colors will look like when not in direct sunlight here, like basically like my studio lights are going to imitate when you get a look there. So as you can see, the actual brushing and polishing on the case are actually quite nice, really well realized. You can see the very fine, you know, knurling there on the crown and the bezel. So really nice touch points, you know, points of you know, tactile interaction with the watch. You can see that the brushing, the way it actually catches the light, it goes from a pale silver to almost a white frost, depending on the way that the light catches it. You can see here it looks more metallic, but then over here it's gonna look a little bit more white, which I think is really nice. And you can see that BGW9 just looks gorgeous in transition. You know, it goes away and then you still have the legibility there. But even in kind of partial readings, you're gonna always have nice high contrast, very legible, in all situations there. So really cool. I'd say, you know, again, on the wrist, large, but the short lugs do help with wearability. Again, you know, if I was to change something, really not a huge fan of the kind of hidden lugs. I think there is a bit too much of a limiting compromise that isn't quite paid off. And the aesthetic there, I think aesthetics wise, you still could have got a very similar look without that, you know, kind of, I guess, compromise or commitment to the design that they made. But, you know, I will say I will commend them in that they did commit to it. And they are doing some tweaks now that there's been a bit of feedback, so I think that's really nice and a very cool thing when it comes to just micro brands in general. That's kind of how they roll. Now, as far as some real highlights, again, that bezel and case finishing, really great, and I think it's let down a little bit by what feels like a very basic bracelet, although it is solid and everything like that. The push pin connectors were a bit of the letdown on something that's supposed to feel really overbuilt. Now, as far as model variants go, there's a ton of different variations. Definitely check their site. There's a lot of different color combos out there. They all look really great and really legible. And then as far as comparable models, it's tough to really compare something like this because it is a bit of a wild card. It's kind of an eccentric watch, and then especially even for a diver, it's really got its own thing going on. So I won't even venture to compare it to anything else that's out there. I'd say bottom line, there's a lot of potential there. And if you're really looking for, let's say, a wild card diver in your collection, something that's just really off the beaten path, or maybe you just collect nothing but dive watches and you're all about weird and strange and new and exciting, I mean, this could definitely be something that you could see us having a lot to offer. A lot of those modern amenities there that you're looking for, very unique and really handsome. I think design wise, it really hits the mark. I think it's just a little bit of the kind of functionality, the ergonomics and whatnot, which are a trade-off, in any case, when you are really focusing on design elements. I think there's definitely a bit of a trade-off as far as ergonomics and wearability go, but I think stylistically this thing is really handsome, really tough, and just screams, hey, I'm a tough tool dive watch. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.